Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Promising Young Woman, and we are joined by two special guests. You've heard them here on the pod in the past. Nate and Patrick are back, y'all. We are continuing on our, apparently it's a trilogy now, a completed trilogy with this movie on movies that cover some gender politics and gender issues. So we're excited to dive into this combo. All right, so Nate and Pat, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Nate, friend of the pod, and hopefully here for a friendlier conversation than past times.
No promises.
Why do you gotta set the mood like that? This is Pat. I am back again as well, a friend of the pod, and I'm looking for this experience to just be whatever it chooses to be.
Ah, how calm and zen of you. Yes.
Wow.
Of course, after our House of Darkness experience from last time, he's come ready to receive whatever happens. Love it. We'll see how this goes then. All right, Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for Promising Young Woman?
Sure. A young woman traumatized by a tragic event in her past seeks out vengeance against those who crossed her path.
All right. So before we dive into our one-sentence summaries, some quick context on why we're reviewing this movie that came out a couple of years ago. We started this conversation way back when with Men, where we had Nate and Pat on the pod to talk about Men. It was after like an A24 gauntlet. Then our dear friend Pat here suggested we watch House of Darkness as another follow-up or another type of movie that covers gender politics, and then we decided, hey, let's talk about this one as well, which covers it from a very different angle. So that's why we're here talking about this movie from like 2020 or something like that. All right, I'm curious to hear both of y'all's thoughts. So let's see if your one-sentence summary reveals anything, any clues. Nate, do you want to share your one-sentence summary for Promising Young Woman?
Sure. So my one-sentence summary is a searing indictment on rape culture and nice guy self-delusion, but too many twists muddies the message.
Well, a reveal there. We'll have to dive into that. Patrick, I'm curious your thoughts.
A young woman's drive to avenge her friend's abuse leads her down a dark spiral of contempt, heartache, and redemption.
All right. A little bit more neutral. No clues there, really. We'll have to wait a little longer for your thoughts. Sarah, what was your one-sentence summary?
Mine is a masterclass in using scheduled texts.
That's good.
It's funny, actually. So Sarah and I reviewed this when it came out, the year that it came out. And my original one-sentence summary is pretty similar to yours, Nate. I think I'd mentioned something about feeling muddled as well. So he's growing on me over time. So my one-sentence summary now is the justice of empathy against misogyny is searingly sweet.
Also use searing.
Yeah. All right. So let's dive into our initial thoughts of this movie that we can unpack with your perspectives on this a little bit more. This came out a couple years ago, so if you haven't seen it yet, we recommend checking it out, and we're just going to dive right in. So there will be spoilers. Okay. Pat, since you didn't get to share really your thoughts yet, let's start with you. What were your thoughts about Promising Young Woman?
It was okay.
All right, unpack that.
I appreciated...
Love the 3-sentence punchy reviews.
I appreciate... No. Come on. Don't even utter words in that movie in the same sentence. I respected and appreciated what it was trying to drive in terms of messaging. I think largely I enjoyed the ride, but it felt very predictable and started feeling redundant after a certain point.
Even the ending?
Not the final ending, no. But it reached a point where I was like, oh, I see what happened here. So there's this buildup of like why she's doing this, and the reveal of why she was doing it when it finally did come. I had basically said 40 minutes before, like, okay, she's mad at this dude because this dude raped her friend and her friend committed suicide. And that was before either of those were confirmed. I mean, I feel like it was pretty obvious that the guy in question was the abuser, but like the suicide thing was not mentioned at that point and not mentioned for a while. So yeah, it was all right.
Wow, okay. I don't think I've seen you that non-opinionated ever in my
Yeah.
life. So this is new. We'll have to unpack that a little bit more. All right. Nate, what about your thoughts?
Um, yeah, I think overall I liked it quite a bit. I think technically it was pretty perfect. I don't really have any criticisms in that regard. I thought it looked great. The soundtrack was excellent. I thought the all strings version of Toxic is like, there's no reason to ever hear that song in any other way.
That was
um,
awesome. That was a good touch.
that
The
was
highlight,
fantastic.
yes.
I thought the performances were very good. Obviously, Carrie Mulligan was incredible. She deserves any accolades that are thrown at her for this. And I thought casting Bo Burnham was very shrewd. I thought he did fine in the movie, but I think just because of like and I think a lot of people's natural uh, uh, sort of respect and trust for him as an artist, like allowed me to very easily get lulled into like the same sorts of uh, like false sense of security there. Uh, Even with like the red flags, like I thought that was a very sort of I thought that twist that he was there was like a very earned twist in my mind. I thought that was excellent, and I didn't really see it coming. But yeah, I think the last 20 minutes kind of like didn't work for me in a lot of ways. I think it just started to like twist and twist and twist, and yeah, I don't know how much we want to get into it, but those last
Oh,
20
we
minutes
have an hour.
really
We're gonna get into it.
Yeah,
fall
for
apart for
sure.
me.
Okay. Taking a pin in my head to come back to the last 20 minutes and um, why that potentially didn't work for you.
Yeah.
Sarah, this is, I think, second time watching it. Have you watched it since? Okay. Curious your
No, this was
thoughts
my second
on
time.
the second viewing experience.
I had a great time again. I loved this movie the second time around. Like Nate said, like technically it's so well executed. I loved the writing, especially like the dialogue is so witty, but I also think that the the script as a whole does a really good job taking you on this journey with this character, and there's these huge tonal shifts that happen. And this time I was really cognizant of how the movie had primed me for that tonal shift before it happened. So it did feel like I'm just being like jerked around from like one thing to another. So I was just really impressed all over again at how well executed this was. Had a great time. Would recommend.
My first time watching this movie, I didn't love it. I think there was things that it did that um, there's a lot of hyperbole in this in general. It's very stylized, and at the time I was like, man, with a topic like this, like, oh, it didn't sit right with me that we are stylizing it in this way and kind of packaging up in this way. But upon a second viewing, I think that the it grew on me over time. And I think upon a second viewing, I think a lot of the hyperbole is grounded in a lot of truths about perspectives that people have about this topic in general. So while it's exaggerated in a lot of ways, so many of the things and people that Cassie encounters in each of those like little sub chapters feel so intentional. And there's a lot of like smaller throwaway lines and things like that. That man, there's just like so much in like small comments that some of the characters would make that I'm like, we could unpack that. And there's just so much that that represents, that I thought was really well done. So I was noticing a lot more of the smaller details and the smaller scenes that the movie chose to include, um, of like everyday misogyny that happens that isn't, as big as what happens to her friend, but even little things like the guys catcalling her and her just staring them down, or the comment that one of the guys makes, like, why are you wearing so much makeup, you're so beautiful, but why are you wearing so much makeup? And it's just like that little scene in of itself could be unpacked with so much meaning. So it's noticing a lot more of those details.
I feel like there's, with the exception of maybe the father, and rightfully so, but there is not a single likable male character in this movie. I mean, to your point, Nate, Bo Burnham gets you in the beginning. I felt the same way. And
Yeah.
then as that builds, it's just like, damn it. Okay. I thought Bo Burnham was an excellent choice. I
Yeah.
thought, and like with his just natural wittiness, I thought like having him be like a bubbly, persistent, charming character, like the way he entered the film, was just like a perfect choice.
Yeah.
And that was one of my challenges with this movie at the beginning when I first watched it, is that like in general we live in a society that's so, polarizing in its opinions about things, and a lot of that's because of the like super extreme language that we use or depictions that we use of different perspectives. And I was like, oh, like I don't love that this is kind of, it feels like it's contributing to that. But the second viewing, like there's so many women that are also, there's like a searing indictment of them as well and the roles that they played in this. um the friend and the dean, like this easily could have been like a, um all guys suck and women are all victims, and this movie's like not interested in that. It's like revealing a lot more, um just like how we react to these situations in general as people. And so there are women in this that are also judged and have that searing indictment. And I thought it was interesting that like the person that really like truly repents and has that like growth is the lawyer, who is a man. And so it feels, I think, more balanced than this could have been, which was just could have been just a total, um like female, empowerment revenge film. And this movie's like a lot more nuanced in its what it's trying to do. So let's talk about that ending, the last 20 minutes. I'm intrigued to hear, Nate, your thoughts on why it didn't work for you. And it sounds like Pat, by that point, you're also like, I kind of see this coming a little bit. And there are so many twists and turns that it didn't work for you as well. So let's unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah. So, yeah. I think I'm still processing this movie. I just watched it yesterday, to be honest. So
Same.
so I just don't know what it is. I think is part of the problem. That's why I say muddied, because part of it felt like it wanted to be a straightforward kind of like revenge joyride. It doesn't really commit to that. It kind of subverts your expectations, and she doesn't get like the straightforward violent revenge that you sort of expect. And then it's like, okay, now it's going to be like a character study that sort of like interrogates like the erosion of the self that happens like during like revenge pursuit and trauma fixation and that kind of stuff. And it's sort of like a bleak look at like uh I don't know, just like uh abusers getting away with it basically. And I was like, that sucks, but okay. And then there's like, I don't know, just sort of fantastical um text message police ending, just like very much, I don't know, it just didn't work for me for a lot of reasons. It felt kind of tacked on, I think. And it felt like, uh, for a movie that sort of feels like it's interrogating and um, calling into question like a lot of our social systems and things like that, to have a movie that ends with like complete trust in uh, like the police to like uh, bring justice in a system that has already basically exonerated these men in the past. Just it rang kind of hollow for me. And they only take away like the one guy. Like there's no distribution of the video, or like that's left sort of ambiguous or whatever. Uh, so I thought it rang a little hollow. It seemed like it kind of wanted to do everything, and I think it, for me, it didn't do any of them very well. Maybe I need to watch it again, but that was my sort of, that's what I've been kind of chewing on the past day.
So are you talking about that like everything that happens after the cabin? So the whole wedding scene, that part, or
I
everything that
think
happens in the cabin
everything
is kind of
from the
included?
start of the cabin on, like all of it
Ah,
together, doesn't uh, just in uh, uh, I don't know. I was totally on board with the movie up to that point, and then it's just like it feels like it wants to subvert your expectations too often in like the last 20 minutes, that it was like be, you have to be something. What are you, movie?
where did you think the
So
movie was going up until the cabin point? Where did you think they were going to go?
I wasn't sure, honestly. I was
Okay,
on board with it going either way. So
okay,
so if it ended with like cut to credits with like burning pile of wood, that would have sucked. But I would have been like, feels
yeah.
like it's saying something for sure. Like I feel like I need to think about it a lot. Uh, and then it just kind of kept going on. And I don't know, like I read a couple of reviews about this also, and the people that struggled with it also were like, it just doesn't, it doesn't feel satisfying for a few reasons. Like she kind of gets them in the end or whatever, but it's like she's dead. She's doing it from beyond the grave. And one review put it really well, and it was like two women had to die for one man to get arrested, and that's like, that feels not satisfying in the context of like the topic that we're talking about here. So I think, yeah, that's kind of how it fell apart for me.
Yeah, I was also not. I think I'm in a pretty similar space with you, Nate, in terms of the beginning of the cabin scene, with the exception of the music, was kind of the start of where it fell off for me. I think that the way the the writing went about it in terms of the sequence of events to me felt like it cheapened the richness of the movie. And that's for me really why I kind of feel like it was okay. It was something that was like pushing really hard, but it didn't end strongly in a way that felt congruent with the rest of the film. And so it's kind of like leaving me wanting more. And so what I mean by that is like when you think about the character, so one of the things I really did like about it that you were speaking to, Jen, earlier on was kind of like bringing to light the concept of internalized sexism and the women who are able to just dismiss these things that happen and make excuses, but then when they're put in a situation where they directly or indirectly could be a victim, everything changes. I thought that was very clever. I I appreciated about uh, Carrie Mulligan's character is that she had this kind of way of finessing a situation where even though it seemed like she was out of control, she always controlled the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so having her go into the cabin and go upstairs and lose that control felt to me just like it cheapened the execution of like the big moment because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't seem on brand with the character that she would not only for that to happen, but she like planned for that to happen. Like she suspected that this could happen. That didn't feel in line with this character who was just like in the driver's seat the whole time, even in situations where it appeared like she was so vulnerable and susceptible.
Shockingly, I agree.
Wow.
A first for our guest
Wow, what a
appearances, I think.
moment. Here we are, April 2023.
That was the true arc of the trilogy. Pat and I become
Yeah,
friends
that was a
again.
heartwarming moment right there. I love that I agree was prefaced with shockingly. That was great. That was great. That's so fascinating. Because it sounds like Pat, what you're saying is that what you knew about this person is that she's thought through and carefully planned each step of, like, every sub chapter that we've seen. She's always had a careful plan in place, and so um, I think it sounds like you interpret it as like she didn't expect that this would happen, or that she was expecting this would happen and was okay with it,
I am
right?
surprised that the character would suspect that that could happen
And not have a plan.
and not, yeah. And given how thought out all of her other like scenarios were, specifically with Allison Brie and the Dean. I mean, there was like steps and coordination and all kinds of things that had to go into that. And so you could tell she is very diligent in her process.
Mhm.
And I feel like with her setting up all these scheduled texts, to go back to Sarah's comment, just felt like she threw her diligence out the window and was like, whatever's going to
Mm.
happen is going to happen.
Mm. That's so interesting. Yeah, on the second viewing, I f- I was thinking about this a lot more too, because what I remembered actually was in that final scene. My wrong impression was that she was actually going there to take Al out, and upon the second viewing, I was like, actually, she wasn't going there to kill him. She was going there to like carve Nina's name into his body,
Yeah.
but she really wasn't there to take him out. And the fact that it almost as if like she'd given herself over to this larger mission. And I wonder that scene where she watches the tape and realizes that Ryan was a part of it, I feel like was this like big turning point that I didn't really like see as significant um the first time around, which is the fact that Ryan, who seemed like this guy that she finally could trust, that she thought was a good guy and then turned out not to be, I think that just like sowed this like hopelessness in her, that she's like, I'm just like, what else do I have to do other than to like give myself over to this, and this will be the way that I like reclaim my story. But there's just so much that she'd been carrying up until that point, and then to like have that final moment where you're like willing to trust someone again, and then to have that like taken away and like confirm everything that you're fighting against. I think um I didn't really pick up on that the first time around, and I that was my reading the second time around, is that like it's actually a tragedy. She was like willing to give herself over to this, and that was her way to like tell the rest of her story. Is she's almost united now with Nina in them both fighting for something, but ultimately being martyrs at the end of it, which is like I think a more tragic reading,
Yeah.
sure, of this ending, but it I think it makes a little bit more sense than and congruent with what we've seen with the rest of the character.
I mean, I kind of agree, but that's just
You
yeah.
agreed with me a minute ago. Don't you backtrack on that.
I just think that's a very bleak, like ending. First of all, and it's like
Mhm.
sort of like cinematographically like dissonant, like with what we're seeing on screen. Like the music and everything at the actual end of like the text is
Mhm.
like this is like a triumph. Uh, but in reality, both these women are dead, and it's like there's like it's a bleak outlook of like you know the I don't know, the outcome of like trauma survivors and like rape
Mhm.
survivors is suicide. Like that's the way out, basically. That I think that's where it doesn't work for me. Which I don't know. Part of me thinks I'm overthinking it.
Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Sarah, yeah, what was your interpretation of that ending?
Yeah, it's interesting because I see where Nate and Pat, you guys are coming from. It I feel like it didn't work as well for me upon second viewing. Um, but it's also one of those where I don't know how I would change it.
Mhm.
Um, and so I remember after we watched it when it came out, I read like an article and it talked about seeing Cassie like an addict. And so she's like managing her
Hmm.
addiction for most of the movie, and then it looks like she's starting to like go into recovery, get rid of the revenge, and then she falls back in hard. And so this is her demise, and she succumbs to this addiction. And so I think when interpret the movie through that lens, it feels more coherent and like congruous to me. um, but I think without that framing, the ending does feel a little dissonant with the rest of the movie. But I think like the rest of the movie is so strong that that doesn't bother me as much. But I definitely see where you guys are coming from.
Yeah.
I think for for me, an ending that would have felt more in line. So it was interesting that because they didn't have to go this route, that like the main like guy, um, rapist abuser guy, is now like settling down and getting married. Um, it would have felt, to, at least to me, more in line if she like somehow played that video at his wedding, like in a backdrop, so that everybody could see him and his friends and have an understanding, and just like, you know, destroy them from the inside out. Because she she had this way about her of like injecting fear into people, and that was kind of like the way she maneuvered with the guys in the beginning with McLovin. It was like she scared them so like to the core and had them so rattled that they had to just sit there in their shame and in their like what the fuck just happenedness. And so
Well, not
I
just
was
that, but
expect
awareness, injecting awareness into people. I think.
right, right. And
Yeah.
so my thought would be like an attack of character. And so my thought would have been that it would have been more in line with that type of execution of I'm gonna destroy your life from the inside out with this awareness, with this showcase of who you actually are to your peers and your loved ones and so on.
Yeah, I think I would have liked that ending better, to be honest. I don't know how I would have script doctored it either, but yeah, good. Well done, Pat. Good attempt.
Why are you being so nice to me today?
I don't know why you doing so good today.
Yeah, you two are very much aligned today.
Yeah,
The sun must have rose from the west.
it's
But I think what she's focused on isn't necessarily trying to expose them to other people or shaming them, because like so many of the things she sets up is more about less about like catching them in the moment and more about like, can you see from another perspective now how this must feel? And
mhm.
so while it's searing and it's definitely spicy, but it's more inviting them to see from another perspective. And when they can't themselves, she's like putting them in a simulated situation that kind of shows and reveals that. Because if you think about it, like so many of the things that she sets up, they aren't actually ruining the careers of these people. They aren't actually putting these people in danger. And she's very deliberate about um, not really truly harming them, right? But it's more a moment of like, imagine what this would have been like if this had been true for you, like with a friend waking up in the hotel room with a guy. She didn't actually put her ex-friend in a um, compromising situation, but it was more like, can you now imagine what it must have been like for Nina? And now you can empathize. And I think it felt a lot more like harsh and vindictive the first time around watching it, but the second time around I was like, she's actually not, she's not intentionally trying to hurt people. It's more like, let me invite you into a space where you can walk in another shoes for even 5 seconds and like play this out in your mind. And now you're different. Like you've seen and been aware of what another person's perspective is. So I don't know if like exposing them. I mean, we saw the two of them like soothe each other, be like, it's not your fault, like we'll deal with it, you know. And it's like, I'm like, those two, I don't know if they're capable of empathizing, but like
Yeah.
they would have gone on the defensive, you know, or like exposing them is more fearing them into changing their beliefs versus them really truly empathizing and understanding in a moment of reflection.
I'm gonna challenge that cordially because I
Oh.
think that part of the reason she ended up on this path was because she couldn't get justice for Nina, and it took a toll on her. She drops out of school. She has emotional and mental um, kind of consequences that come from that, and it feels very much like, well, I can't get justice specifically for Nina, so she goes into like this vigilante mode. I think having the means available to her, even though it's later, to get justice directly for Nina and having that video, I think she still would have done it. I think the stepped back kind of vigilante approach, I think that worked because it's what she had available to her, and I would imagine that she would have, because and she did, like with the video, like utilize it once that was available to her. Um, yeah. So, but I do agree with your point about like presenting the scenarios from a different perspective, and I still think that could have been done without the ending going the way that it did, such that she lives and the guys with the extremely punchable faces don't, at least for the few minutes that it feels like they won, feel like they win.
Yeah.
So another idea is to make that moment when she sees the video and everything changes like more dramatic, because I think if that happens and you can see like, oh no, like she was in control before but she's out of control now, and then it leads her down this destructive path, maybe that would have felt more like correct for the character, even though it still ends in tragedy. I think if that moment when she sees the video and she decides on this course of action, if that had gone just a little bit differently, maybe the ending would have been set up a little bit better. I don't know.
Something that I didn't feel or remember like noticing the first time around as much is the significance of Ryan specifically being in that video and her hearing his voice and that being part of the grief of that moment. It's one, obviously seeing that video in and of itself and like that bringing up all of this like anger and rage and pain in her, but two, I think this whole Ryan storyline intersecting is so key. It's probably the reason why the movie spends so much time in this like rom-com unfolding of their story, because for someone who has seen the the dudes in her life like wreak so much havoc, and for her to like finally be willing to like trust and give this guy a chance, like she'd gone on a like a such a big emotional journey to get there, and then for Ryan to then be in that video, like I think that detail is so important to that moment. The movie could have not had him be intersecting with that storyline and just been like, here's a character where she's beginning to date again and trust and whatnot, but that like crumbling of like, I'm gonna give this person a chance, and then they turn out to be exactly like everything that else that I knew. I feel like that letdown, I think helps feed the emotional arc of the ending scene.
Yeah, I still feel like that would have, like, that anger and that like heartache and rage still would have propelled her to facilitate this big scenario of awareness of, like, I'm gonna expose you and burn your life to the ground, in like a very intentional, thoughtful, deliberate, as her earlier scenarios were, type of way.
Hmm.
Like, your career's ruined, none of you are doctors anymore. You're like,
Mm.
you know, as the credits roll, we know that they're going to end up on the sex offender registry, and the ones who aren't in jail. Like, it's a wrap for you guys.
So you're like, the Cassie I know is far more cunning than what we got. Like you're like, we could have done better, girl. Like we've seen you. I think I see what you're saying now.
I think that would have been a more satisfying ending for me. I don't think uh, I'm so like against this ending in terms of like it's out of character for her. I think it's more just like the overall message of the movie feels like muddled by an ending where the trauma survivors are dead. I guess for me, and like there's triumphant music playing in the background, like that. That's where it falls apart for me.
That's fair. I want to switch gears a little bit, and I'm curious everyone else's perspective on this. But I think I didn't love the dynamic that was created between Cassie and her parents. It felt undercooked to me in that, you know, there's a lot of her interactions are this, like, they want me to move out and like they want me to get my life together. Um, and then kind of at the end, they just throw you this like moment of emotional disconnection that is like, oh, we love Nina like a daughter, but we've missed you too. And I wish that that had kind of been more of the focal point of that relationship, but that just kind of came in right at the end, just to sour the fact that her dying, just add a little more wood onto the fire of disappointment that is the ending. Is that, oh, now her parents, who were just feeling hopeful about her coming back into the version of herself that they know their daughter, now have to mourn that, in addition to just mourning her. But that felt like it was just kind of thrown in at the last minute before she turns into, her last chapter of conquest here.
Um, I mean, I actually liked the relationship with the parents, but I think in general we kind of agree. Again, I do think it muddies like the message of the film because it adds more to like the tragedy and like takes away from the triumph. Because, uh, yeah, I thought the father's line, especially that you just said about like we loved her as a daughter, but we missed you so much. Just like adds more sting to her kind of like as you put it, Sarah, succumbing to her addiction. So I think the wedding scene, especially now that I think about it, is where it all falls apart because it's like such a bleak ending, and like having having just like this one guy get carried away by the police, and like I forget what the song
Schmidt
was.
is running into the forest.
Yeah, it just like doesn't it doesn't reverse the bleakness. Maybe there's more to unpack there.
I guess that's like have probably been circling around this, but it's really like this movie is setting us up to believe that it's going to be a triumph, but it's not interested in being a triumph. It is, to me, it's a tragedy. This movie has a tragic ending. And that fast diversion in that cabin scene was like not what I expected at all. But
Yeah,
it's it's that's why I think it makes this movie so good, because it does subvert that expectation of like she triumphs with this like violent retribution. It's like no, yet again, this guy, because he is stronger, just can dominate and overpower her. Like
Yeah,
the thing that she was fighting against, she also can't. So it's such a play with our expectations, though, because we see her as this vigilante for so long,
I agree. I think that's a good ending, but like,
but it's the
it
wedding scene.
actually ends on like
Mm,
exciting music and like a zoom in on a winky face text emoji. Like that
yeah,
is how it
yeah, yeah,
actually
yeah.
ends, and it's like, no, you didn't earn that. That's the movie that you just abandoned like 3 scenes ago.
Mm. So if they committed to the cabin scene and then just cut that wedding scene, this would have worked better for you, Nate.
I think it would work
Just
better.
full
I
on
don't know
cut.
how it would be. Oh, if they committed to the cabin scene, like if it was just full on
Cabin
tragedy.
scene, Schmidt and whatever his other name, Al
Yeah,
Monroe character, going to
yeah,
buried body
Oh, they didn't
end
bury the
movie
body; they buried the body.
or
Let's
yeah,
also just add insult to injury there of just like the fact that they could stand there and watch a human being's body be burned
yeah,
and feel nothing and be totally apathetic to it.
yeah,
Because then it's not like I'm not gonna take us down a loophole of body disposal semantics, but I feel like when people are buried, it's like, okay, now the thing's done and we're leaving. To go that route, it's like y'all have to post up there to make sure that it's done. So you're willing to just be there, just breathing that in and seeing it and bullshitting yourselves about how you're the victim of this scenario. And it furthers the tragedy
yes,
of it, in my
yes.
opinion.
yeah,
And you see them just like reassuring each other, like, it was an accident. This is not your fault. Like, she was coming for you. And then you can just imagine and play back to when it unfolded with Nina, the way that they just like validate each other's like,
yeah,
twisted mentalities. It's
yeah.
and like start to
I do.
believe it themselves too.
Yeah,
It's
I do
too
think that that was
so
powerful, and I also liked that it. One of the more interesting like reviews I read says it like flips the stripper dies at the bachelor party trope to like looking at it from the perspective of like the actual person who died, to a certain extent, which is like uh, also very good. There's a lot to like about this movie.
Can we also give a shout out to Laverne Cox for just always being comedic relief wherever she goes and just being such a great fit for the coffee shop owner slash best friend.
Yes, she's great. That coffee shop. Okay, what did you guys think about like the costuming, the set design, all of the like stylization around that?
I
Did it
think the
work for you? Didn't
stylization and the visuals were like my favorite part. One of my favorite parts. Like
mm,
that offset. That was my whole thing with this movie is I felt like it had so much goodness going for it, and then it feels like it just got kind of yanked down and averaged out for me, like at the end.
Yeah,
Um,
so it's the ending that actually is overshadowing. Like up until that ending, you were with it, Pat?
hmm
Okay.
And
I
then
was I was too.
yeah, when you look at
Mm.
the movie end to end, that's kind of why to me it's like, well, it was okay. Without
Okay.
having a fully fleshed out hour-long conversation about it, that would be how I would my one sentence comment to a person in an elevator. But to your point, the stylization was great. That was one of the highlights for me.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I agree. I liked it a lot. I liked how the whole thing felt candy coated. I like that. Uh, there's a lot of sort of like feminine iconography that's used in like um, uh, as more like strength and stuff. Like it subverts your expectations in that way. Like she dresses up like very feminine and she's in control of every situation and stuff like that. Yeah, I thought it was great.
So many bows. And I love that the cinematography is so intentional about doing this like pan up on her hairstyle with a close up of the bow, right as she's like about to ring the doorbell. You know, like it's like we gonna make sure you gonna see this, and um, the stylization was just like so fresh and so fascinating. Um, and like you mentioned, I like the way you phrased it, Nate, around like reclaiming the strength around that. It's often seen as this like soft and feminine style, but she is a total badass and can wear and rock that, and they can be together in one person.
And I love that it was also a way to visually show like her own arrested development. Like, because it was very like young looking, like very like bright, colorful dresses, the bows, like that's not what you would typically expect like a 30-year-old woman to wear. So I love that even in her, the way that she was dressed and her hair choices when she was just her and not her vigilante persona, you see this like youthfulness and this kind of stuckness that she's not actually, maybe not like dressing her age. And so it almost shows you like there's something else going on there. And I just thought that was an interesting way to use color and wardrobe to show maybe some of what's going on inside of her.
I didn't think about that.
I didn't either. That's a really
It's
good
good.
point.
Yeah, good observation.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that either, especially in her bedroom too. I noticed it most in her bedroom. Like it's a lot of the very, very youthful childhood decor.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up for Promising Young Woman?
Last thoughts. Uh, I didn't know anything about this movie before watching it. Like
Uh-huh.
Same.
literally anything. I just knew that we were watching it. And uh, we get like 6 or 7 minutes in, and she's like wasted at this guy's apartment, and like he's taking advantage. And I was like, "Fuck, I am not ready to watch this." I like paused it and went for a walk, and then like there's the realization that she's sober, and I was like, "Oh, wow, okay, all right."
So you didn't
I
watch
don't know
any
what.
trailers or anything. Like literally
No,
went
no,
in.
yeah, I just went in blind.
That's amazing.
Which is
I
also
heard
like, I think I may have been a little bit subversion fatigued at the end of the movie also, because like there's quite a few like along the way, if you haven't seen trailers or anything like that.
Mm.
I realized I didn't know what I was going into before I started it. Obviously, like Nate said, I knew we were watching it and going to talk about it. And then when I heard the conversation with the guys at the bar in the opening scene about like basically why is she doing that to herself? She needs to be safe. Like
Yes.
she's asking for like, that whole thing. Seeing the way she was kind of sprawled out on that bench or booth or whatever, I was like, "Oh, I've seen the trailer to this movie." But it stopped at knowing that it was about a woman who was,
Mm.
for lack of a better term, like the vigilante part of the story,
Mm.
like going around and putting like these men into these scenarios of awareness and
Yeah.
like fear.
And the trailer, if I remember back correctly, watching the trailer too, sets it up to be a revenge thriller. It like leans so heavily into that. It has the strings version of Toxic playing in the trailer as well. So you like primed for a certain ending. And so like the fact that it subverts that is like a total, I think, shock for a lot of people because it's, you kind of know where you think it's gonna go, and then it takes a left turn. But yeah, the movie itself, I think, in the marketing leads into it being like a revenge thriller as well.
The two posters, the taglines are "Take her home and take your chances," and "Revenge
Mm.
never looked so promising."
Mm.
So yeah, they weren't
Mm.
trying to hide it whatsoever.
Yeah, which I wonder if it does or doesn't help the way that this movie is received. I mean, by the time you're on the journey, you also probably think you're on that ride as well. but the fact that it takes such a hard left turn at the ending, like I think it's kind of it takes time to like swallow that a little bit, you know, because you're just so primed for this thing that you thought was going to unfold happen, and when it doesn't do that, you're like, wait, now I need to go like rewind this back. Um, and so I wonder if even with the marketing too, it leaning so heavily into that, like I don't know if it the fact that it's such a surprise ending helps it or makes it harder to process. I don't know, but it's
Yeah, if
weird.
I
Yeah, we'll see.
knew what I know now, I would have given myself more than a day to sit with this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So are we supposed to relate this to Men or House of Darkness in some way? Like, how do we call back and complete the trilogy here? I will say that the two 10-minute scenes with her and McLovin and the first guy were like, uh, a perfect 10 minutes of what the entire runtime of House of Darkness was trying to do.
Yes.
And in turn, they were able to do so much more.
Yeah.
But they didn't quite do as much as Men did. Interpret that how you will.
More shocking ending: last 10 minutes of Men or last 10 minutes of Promising Young Woman?
I think shocking is not the right word.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still traumatized by the ending of Men.
Uh huh.
So, and I'm not traumatized by the ending of Promising Young Woman. I'm sad, but I'm not traumatized.
I do find it interesting that I think uh y'all felt like the ending of Men was bleaker than like Pat and I did, and I think there's been sort of a reversal with this movie, at least initially. I don't know if your opinions have changed, but um yeah, that's sort of like an interesting
Mm,
difference there.
yeah, that is true. I'm trying to think back to the ending of Men now and put myself into that headspace that I never want to be in. Ever.
Yeah, that
I think
movie.
it felt more hopeless that it was like, this is just how it is. Like that, this is just generationally, like how, I don't know. That feels
Yeah.
far more like definitive, and like this is like far more passive too, you know? Just
Yeah,
like a,
I guess I don't know, the women being like the ones we see at the end, like
yeah,
smiling, and there's like, one of them's with child is like more
more
optimistic
hopeful.
than
This one where both of the women are
our,
no longer. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Well, hopefully we never have to talk about or reference Men ever again.
It's 2023, Pat. You never stop at a trilogy.
Oh, okay.
yeah. This is true.
I save all of
This is
that
a
for
franchise now.
Yeah.
no. I save all of
We're
that for
about
the
to be the
stream.
Fast and Furious
Yeah.
cinematic universe where they just make 15 movies. How many that?
Oh goodness. I'm gonna save all of that for the Scream franchise and slasher stuff and not this.
Yeah.
Because I don't even want to know what our further entries for this franchise would look like.
I mean, this was a great movie. Like in general, I very much enjoyed it, and I enjoyed thinking about it. Yeah,
Same.
it's really only one bad entry in this trilogy so far.
And it was Men. We can all agree.
Oh man. Well, it was really fascinating to hear both of your thoughts in our Men conversation, and it's been so just illuminating and interesting to hear your thoughts on Promising Young Woman as well. And I suppose our conversation about House of Darkness was, I don't even remember what we talked about, but I'm
I don't
sure
know.
it was great as
I've
well.
been meaning to go back. I don't know how you made an episode out of that. It must
I
have been
don't
like
we
15 minutes long.
I think we spent the last like 15, 20 minutes of that just like shooting the shit about, I don't even
Yeah.
remember what, but like about movies in general or something.
I
um
think One last thing to
Yeah.
point out that
Yeah.
I know we touched on, I think initially when we were watching or reviewing Men, was that both of the previous entries were written and directed by men. And this, which I think we all agree was the best execution, was the only one that was helmed
Hmm.
by a woman.
True.
Yeah. I love that you point that out because I think that like the main story arc that we see is from a woman's perspective and is very much about her seeking justice or redemption or peace or something. And most of Men, especially Men, was focused on all of the male characters and like that. I remember in our conversation we talked about how the main female protagonist played by Jessie Buckley, like we don't know anything about her other than she's just like here on a little staycation. Like we learn very little about who she is as a person outside of the context of her in relationship to her ex.
No, that's true. No, my only thought is that like I think Men was focused on like uh just trauma and abuse in general, and I think the character aspects were, I think, a little less important. Like we don't really know anything
Mm.
about the men either. They're just sort of archetypes. It was just more about like the sort of the feelings and the themes and the visceral nature of abuse and trauma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it is a good point. Like we don't know anything about the female protagonist.
Emerald Fennel was able to make us feel something while watching this movie without the need for apples fucking falling from trees for no reason at all.
Disagree.
And there goes all the good progress we made over the course of this episode.
Oh no.
World order is restored.
Another Men episode.
No, please, no.
The cry of desperation from Pat. No, please, no. I felt that. It's okay. We won't put you through that. We will reference it at some point, I'm sure. Men, there's just such a memorable experience. How could we not?
Yeah. I mean, that in of itself is like
Plus,
made a
getting
mark.
to instigate it. Yeah, we will take that opportunity any day. Cordially.
Cordially. Cordially.
I think we should wrap this episode before I start going off about the lighthouse again. Cordially.
And the mermaid. Yeah, we're going straight into the outro. All right, well, this is our review and discussion of Promising Young Woman. You can find it available to stream on Amazon Prime Video. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us, and thank you, Nate and Pat, for joining us. Always a good time. Always good conversations together. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you hung out with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a review letting us know your thoughts about Promising Young Woman. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at MoviesAndUsPod, or you can email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film Air. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you soon.